On this episode of Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton.
In 1976, the small Oklahoma town of Sapulpa was rocked by the brutal murder of the beloved head football coach, husband, and father. In an instant, Jerry Bailey's life was cut short at the hands of his assistant football coach. In this episode, we will talk with Kirk McCracken, author of the book Because of the Hate, The Murder of Jerry Bailey. And we will also hear from Terry Holbrook, who was one of the last people to see Coach Bailey alive that day. All this and more coming up on episode 6 of Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton.
Welcome to the Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton podcast, brought to you by Mojo Merchandise. Join radio veteran Ric Hampton and his guests for informative and entertaining discussions as they take you behind the scenes, behind the stories, behind the music, and more. Originating from the Big Daddy Studios, it's time to go behind the mic, and here's your host, Ric Hampton.
Welcome into episode 6 of Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton. My special guest today is a good friend, and I use that loosely a little bit, but a managing editor of the Sand Springs Leader and the author of the book Because of the Hate, a true story about the murder of Jerry Bailey. Welcome, Kirk McCracken, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Also joining us today, he was a sophomore at the time, I believe. He saw the coaches leave the school together that morning. Welcome to the podcast. Another friend just met, and it's good to have you on, Terry Holbrook.
Good to be here.
We've talked about this book for a long time, Kirk, and I know that you are a huge fan of true crime stories.
Yeah.
Me too. I love them, and that's one reason why we talk so much. The first day the book came out, I actually downloaded the book and read it from digital cover to digital cover.
Right.
Then I went and bought a book, read it again, so I had it actually physically in my hands, gave it away, and then had your agent send me a copy
That's
of it
right,
again.
yeah.
And I've read it again. So this is the third time I have read this book. So it is a good one, as they call it, a page turner.
Yes.
Now, it came out in January of 2018,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the prep work and the whole original manuscript, now that started long before that, right?
Yeah, it started about probably 2003, 2004. And it was just one of those deals where I stumbled upon it. I had known about the story since I was a little kid, and Terry can probably go into more detail about this. But he was Terry. Terry was involved in the situation. He was there when it was going on. As a kid, I had always heard about it, but it was kind of like this story that no one talked about.
Right.
So there was all this information that just wasn't necessarily accurate. And so I had gone pretty much my whole life thinking this had happened or that had happened. And so when I stumbled upon, I was actually looking up old football records, and whenever I stumbled upon the actual story of the two coaches going missing that one morning in 1976, I thought, oh man, I want to get as much information as possible and just soak it up, just so I could go to my parents, who had told me some of the rumors and stuff. Immediately found out a lot of the big rumors were not accurate or just flat out wrong. And so the more information I gathered, the more obsessed I became with it. And after several months, I had all of this information just piled up in front of me. And I thought, well, I'm just going to kind of put this together and then give the information to my parents and say, hey, here's what I found out. But as I started writing, I kept going and thought, I could write a book out of this. I swear to you, I had no intention of writing a book whenever I started looking into it. And then with all this information, I decided to put that together. And so it started about 2003, 2004. I wrote it, put it away for about 10 years. I probably finished it in about 2008, 2007, something like that. And then I put it away, said, no one's ever going to buy this. I tried to go to some major companies, and I tried to get a book agent, and that was impossible. So I completely put it away. And then a couple of years ago, I want to say it sat for about 10 years. And then a couple of years ago, my kids were like, you've got to publish your book. You've got to publish your book. So I got it out, reread it, absolutely hated it.
Right.
I just did not like the way I wrote.
Why did you hate it, though? You told me why, but why did you feel like it?
I was a horrible writer back then.
Yeah.
But that's what's funny is it's hard for me to say because I'm pretty pleased with myself, most of the time.
Yeah.
But I was
you make that aware. Yeah. You're very humble.
Exactly.
Just ask him.
It's hard to be humble when you're this good. But
right.
It was when I first got started writing, and it read like a news story.
Yeah.
If you wanted just the information, it was perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it painted no pictures of the town, of the coaches, of the situation. So I completely rewrote it and absolutely loved it, and then published it. And
a side note to that is it kind of spurred your son on, right, as well, to start writing and really getting into fleshing out stories and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was really instrumental. My daughter, who's now 22, she helped me edit it. If you find any mistakes, it was me, not her, because, I mean, she's meticulous.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But he was like, no, we need to do this. You need to say more about that. And almost every suggestion he had was accurate, was right. But as far as someone who encouraged me from the very beginning was Terry, and that's why I wanted to have him on with us, because when I kind of threw that out to him that I was thinking about doing this, or that we just talked about it, I mean, we spent hours on the phone, and we actually became really good friends because of our love for Sapulpa athletics, because we both graduated from there and I was the sports writer. But we actually loved watching their girls basketball team because they were so good whenever I was the sports writer there. And so when we weren't talking about that, we were talking about this book. He was the one that would give me the inside, just little things here and there, and it would spur me on to say, okay, I've got to put that in the book. I've got to research this. I mean, we even hopped in his truck one time and drove to Okmulgee to find Rieger's house.
The one thing Kirk did in this was he was thorough in finding the facts, finding the people involved at the time. Kent Thompson, the highway patrolman, he interviewed him. Some of the old coaches, Johnny Richardson, Jerry Dean, and Coach Stockard.
Yep.
You know, Coach Stockard was big in this with Kirk. But Kirk went through, and he had to weed out the people that were actually involved.
Right.
I say involved, but there at the time, and the people trying to get into the story, you know, because there was some of that he had to deal with. He did a real good job sorting through everything and getting to the facts.
Terry, why don't you take me back to 1976? And if you can, and talk to me a little bit about that morning, because like in the book, I know that it was odd to those people that saw that morning, like, where are they going? What's going on? I mean, what was going through your mind then, and knowing now what you know? Take me back to that time.
Well, that morning, I was actually late for school.
Surprise.
Because I had a legitimate orthodontist appointment.
Legitimate.
Instead of quote unquote
Right.
orthodontist appointment.
And I happened to come through the doors on the south side of the school by the cafeteria. Right after I got in the door, I mean, as soon as I opened the door, I saw them coming. They were 15 yards away from me. And they got close. Rieger spoke. He said hi. And Coach Bailey was right behind him, and he just smiled and nodded his head. You know, I went on to class. I didn't think any more about it. And then later in the day, we're hearing that Coach Bailey wasn't in class all day. And then we find out even later, like that afternoon, late afternoon, evening, they're missing.
Is that when it hit you that, wait a second,
Yeah.
you know, I saw them.
I saw them.
I just saw them this morning.
Trying to remember if it was Coach Stockard or Mr. Pryor, Antoine Pryor, who was he was
the athletic director at the time, I think, wasn't he?
Yes. Then I think that was like his last year.
Right.
As athletic director. I let one of those guys know that I saw them. You know, the next day, that's all everybody's talking about. They have the wrestling tournament there at the school.
Right.
That's all that's talked about. You know, at some point, someone gets on the loudspeaker and says that, you know, they found Coach Bailey. And about that time, I'm sitting in the stands, and in school, they let school out to come to the wrestling tournament. My dad steps inside the door and motions me down to where he's at, and I go out, and he tells me, and you know, then I look around and I see people that are upset and crying. And then most of the guys on the football team go down to the wrestling locker rooms. You know, everybody's upset, crying. That's basically what I remember. When I did the same thing you did when the book came out. Downloaded it and read it then. Yeah. And, you know, it brought back a flood of emotions. Right. You know. Kirk did a really good job on this.
And I think so, too. When you have an interest in the story, I mean, it makes it a lot easier to write, too. You were talking about how it piqued your interest. When you laid that down, did you think about even picking it up again?
No.
Did you ever think about that at all?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I thought it was done. I mean, the industry is so weird now because when I first started, you could go to Barnes & Noble or you could look online and you know, you could buy a book that told you how to get published by a major publishing company.
Right.
And there were all these steps you had to follow. Of course, you had to write the manuscript, then you had to find a book agent, and then that book agent would then sell your book, and then you were off and running. But now it's virtually impossible to do that as a first-time writer unless you're writing some book about something that's happened nationally and you're involved in it. You're in the know. Now it's cheaper for those companies to publish celebrity cookbooks. I mean, that's literally what one of them told me. Like, that's what we're doing now. A true crime, once large true crime publishing company is now doing celebrity cookbooks. So I really put it away, and self-publishing became a pretty big deal between that, that time that I put it down and decided to pick it back up. So that's the route that I went, and I just said, okay, I've got to do this. But when you do that, you've got to promote it on your own, and do social media and stuff like that. And I had some of my friends after I published it and I started promoting on social media. Some of my friends would send me messages and they were like, "Okay, we got it. We bought the book. Stop putting it on social media." But it's one of those things where you don't know how much is too much and you don't know how much is not enough,
Well, and that is true. Working in radio when I did and stuff like that, we would assume, because we talked about it on the air, that people were listening to that.
Right.
But they don't. And it doesn't happen. So you have to continually, repetitively say, just like with me whenever I was going to launch this podcast, same deal. I was on my social media page constantly getting the same reaction by some people. Okay, we get it. We know you're going to have a show, whatever. But ultimately, to get that message across, you have to do that. And so when you pick that back up and you looked at it and you went back and you made a lot of changes to it and things like that, did you have, I know that in the beginning you talked about that with the book itself, and we're not going to go a lot about what's in the book because I want you to get the book. I trust me, you will love this book. It is fantastic. Let me ask you this. When you picked it back up and you started back in it again, was it easier to talk to people more now? To get more information or more story or other facts about the case?
To be honest, there wasn't really a whole lot of that. I did such extensive interviews and research the first time that I sat down with it, that when I picked it back up again, it was more about painting a picture of the situation. And so more than anything, I went back to the trial transcripts, went through those and got more information about what it looked like, what the scene looked like, what was being said, what the conversations were. And then, you've got to make sure that the timeline adds up and all that kind of stuff. But as far as talking to people, I really didn't do a lot of that. That was mainly the early part of it. And then the rest of it was making it more interesting and more engaging. So whenever the people started, it was to basically make it a page turner. And so then I did take certain chapters and move them and say, okay, I want to make a cliffhanger here and all that. So really I didn't do a whole lot of talking to people during that time, but to kind of add to that a little bit but go in a different direction was whenever I published it, I became really good friends with Jerry's sisters and with some of his family members. And so then my interaction was with them and them thanking me for doing this. And we'd love to have a book signing in Broken Bow because, that's where they were from. Or we'd love to meet you or the family really enjoys it, that kind of thing. That was really reassuring to me because whenever you do a story like this, it's the murder was brutal. And I didn't pull any punches as far as what happened to him. And that was always really concerning to me because Terry will tell you this was not talked about in Sapulpa. Like after the trial, it literally was put in a safe and locked and just put away. And people didn't talk about it. So whenever I was a kid, when I was in high school, I actually had Jerry's wife, Beverly, as a math teacher. And I always felt like I kind of knew a secret because no one talked about it. His name... The building that he helped build, the Bailey building, was called the Blue Building before he died. That's what the high school kids kind of nicknamed it. Well, it was named the Bailey Building after his death. And so it kind of, the Blue Building kind of stuck with people that weren't involved in the situation. like, Terry will tell you, the kids called it the Bailey building for a couple of years, but then it really kind of morphed back into the Blue building. But if you talk to anybody from that era, they immediately corrected you and said, that's not the Blue building.
That's not the Blue building.
That's the Bailey building. Yeah. So when I had her for a teacher, I always kind of felt like I knew a secret, and I wanted to ask her about it, but I never had the guts to, because like I said, it just wasn't discussed.
Why do you think they never talked about it? I mean, it was never talked about again.
I want Terry to answer this question after I answer it.
Okay.
But personally, I think it was because the family was so beloved in Sapulpa. And here's the thing. He had just resigned as the head coach and didn't really have – he had a lot of near misses or, seasons that could have gone one way or the other by just a field goal, and so he wasn't the most successful coach in wins and losses at Sapulpa. But as far as what he did for race relations and what he did for some of the players that didn't necessarily have a lot of the things that the players that came from wealthy families had, what he did in town and the mark that he made, it's unbelievable. And so I personally think it was because the family was so beloved and because they stayed. His wife remained a teacher up until right before her death in 1998. And his kids, they hadn't gone through high school yet. So Guy, his son, was in junior high, and Deidre was about to go into junior high. She was still, I think, in fifth grade or something like that. If it was talked about, more than likely it would get back to them.
Right.
You didn't want to talk about it in front of them, but the adults in town had that same respect. That's my opinion. So, Terry, what do you think?
I think that's the case. I had Miss Bailey as a teacher also, but I really believe that's the case. They stayed in town, and so it was just kind of pushed to the side, and they tried to get on with their lives the best they could, which would have been just, I can't imagine what they went through.
Right. So having lived through that time period there at Sapulpa, did you ever think, oh man, I want to ask her about this, or I want to ask somebody about it? Did you also do the same, kind of just put it away and, okay, it happened and we're moving on?
Basically, that's what happened. I being there while this had happened, you thought you knew everything that went on. Kirk corrected me. The rumor always was that he was stabbed with a screwdriver. That's what I believe.
It became the gospel.
Yeah. That's what I believed for 30 years.
Yeah.
Kirk's like, no. We were talking on the phone. He said, no, it was a knife. So that's just one of the things, that Kirk corrected in this, that beliefs that people had. Yeah. Because we were always told it was a screwdriver.
And see, I had to break down the autopsy report to find out why people thought that.
Yeah.
And the initial stab wound ended up being circular because Bailey fought back. When that happened, I think it either looked like a bullet hole or it looked like more of it had a circular pattern to it. Yeah.
Like a screwdriver
or an ice pick or something like that. Yeah. And so I think that rumor was spread even through law enforcement, because Trooper Thompson, who ended up finding the body in the trunk, when I interviewed him, and unfortunately he's passed away, but when I interviewed him, man, he had tons of detail. And literally it was like yesterday to him. He literally could just, recall everything, but he told me screwdriver, and it just blew me away. And I thought, wow, he's involved in law enforcement, and that rumor has been around for so long, it just became truth.
Yeah.
And so when I told him that, it blew his mind. And he believed me immediately. Whenever I told him how I knew and everything, he was like, I have gone this whole time thinking it was a screwdriver.
Well, and you touched on that rumor being one of them. We've talked about this a little bit, but kind of tell me, there were so many rumors about the story because it was kind of just compartmentalized and put away.
Yeah.
It became the gospel report. What other rumors were there, kind of swirling about this?
Well, to be honest, I'd like to know what some of them were that day, that in the following days. Do you remember?
I don't even think that rumor had hit yet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I don't think, that came just a little bit later.
Okay.
Everybody was just upset at what had happened.
Sure.
Okay, so let me ask you this. With both of those knowing, at the time, they were reported missing, both of them, and they really didn't know foul play. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew until there was some paperwork found with blood on it. But let me ask you that, with you being in that moment, do you remember, when was it that it kind of became a revelation that Rieger was the one.
It was that later that Friday, the words started getting back at what had happened.
Right.
And so it was fairly quick.
And see, in painting that picture, that's the thing. Nowadays we would think, oh my gosh, it'd be instantaneous.
Sure.
And you'd know everything about the case because of social media and everything else.
Yeah.
But that didn't exist. And so therefore Channel 8, I think it was, it was First Media, but, they didn't have, they still had to, they would have had to go back to the station and edit tape and do all this stuff. So, painting it into that, 1976, that's a long ways away. So it's.
Well, at the very least, the reporter would have ran to a phone,
right.
A payphone, which those don't exist anymore.
Right.
And then called his, copy editor, the desk editor on duty or whatever, and say, hey, here's the information. The guy writes it down. He'll write some copy, and then they'll either put it in the newspaper or whether it's a TV station or whatever. Right. So, they couldn't just pick up their cell phone. Well, now when you look, there was a murder that happened here in Sand Springs a couple weeks ago, and I was called out there to take a picture and to figure out what was going on. And while I was there, Channel 2, 6, 8, 23, they
right.
were all there. Every one of those stations had a really pretty young girl, as a reporter, and they all had their phones out and they were live, Facebook Live.
Yeah.
And here's we're on the scene, blah 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 blah, and that's just so different than the
right.
way it was. But when you're talking about rumors, me and Terry actually we've had conversations about the rumors that were going around, and a lot of them I don't feel comfortable mentioning because it involved certain things that were never proven,
right.
and none of it made Bailey look bad. More than anything, it
right.
made Rieger look bad. But some of the rumors were that, like, whenever I grew up thinking that he was found in the trunk of his car in the parking lot of the high school.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he was found in Bixby in the trunk
and see,
of
and
Reagan's
I know at least one person that believes that as well.
Yeah, and I heard that from somebody, too, and
right.
and I heard it was a disgruntled parent.
Yeah.
I heard that for a long time. So in my head, I'm thinking he got killed because somebody's kid didn't get playing time.
Yeah.
That's
right.
what I grew up thinking.
Right.
And so there were a lot of those that existed years after because nobody talked about it. And I just kind of felt like it was time to maybe set the record straight. In the same token, honor his legacy. And what he did that a lot of people don't know about. And, for years, his name wasn't even on the Bailey building. It was just a little monument.
Plaque or a little monument.
Yeah,
thing.
It was an old football that was bronze and everything. And I want to say it was Onus Pankey. It was Onus Pankey that it's one of the biggest I've seen on a weight room.
Right.
But his name is now emblazoned on the side. And so there were lots of rumors that I think they had time to ferment probably through the years. So there probably weren't a lot at first, and then as people whispered it to each other because no one really talked about it openly.
Yeah.
Those rumors kind of became truth.
It kind of stacked on and kind of piled on as you went through. Yeah, I had heard that as well, that it was in the high school parking lot. And then even the screwdriver, there was a woman I talked to not too long ago. She had read the book and just totally shocked. Wait a minute. No, that was a screwdriver. I'm sure it was wrong. No, it's not.
Well, I had one lady say, oh my gosh, whenever he found missing and he was found, those were the longest 2 weeks of my life.
I remember that one. I remember that story.
And I was like, and this
really?
was on social media. And I said, no, it was
actually
basically less than 48 hours.
Right.
Well, reading some of the reviews of the book, once it came out, I would go back like every day and read the new reviews, and people thought it happened in 72, some 73.
Yeah, they were questioning whether.
No, Kirk, it happened in 72.
Yeah, my favorite was the woman though. I do agree with you on that one. That one was my favorite too. 2 weeks. That was the longest 2 weeks of my life. Well, apparently you were checked out for a while because So you talked about the screwdriver. Rumor that was one that was in your head forever too. Any others that you can share or that you thought, oh man, I didn't even know that.
Thinking back, I think that's the one that really stands out to me is the screwdriver, because I don't recall any other rumors. Not saying that there weren't.
Right.
I'm sure there were.
That was the big one. That's the one that I heard more than anything.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it. If the trooper that found his body, who he had a personal tie to, because they were friends.
Poker
they
buddies,
were friends. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to give away the line, but it's one of the best lines in the whole book. Honestly, was whenever he was found, when he opened that trunk. I'll be honest, I got a little teary-eyed at first because I thought, man, I can't imagine lifting the trunk lid and finding one of your friends that you play, poker with or that you hang out with and everything else. And whenever he uttered the word, "Oh, Jerry," I knew, I read that emotion into that line because that's what was going through his mind too. He was hoping and praying that he lifted that trunk lid and it wouldn't be anybody in there or it wouldn't be Jerry in there.
Right.
It was.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Kent Thompson led the funeral procession.
Yeah. And it was in a newspaper, Kent Thompson told me this, but in a newspaper article it said that whenever he arrived at the cemetery, which was a couple miles away from the cars were still leaving the parking lot of First Baptist Church. They kept coming. Yeah. I mean, like, if you were trying to get somewhere that day in Sapulpa, you were screwed. You just had to pull over.
Right.
Yeah. And to me, that's a testament to
Jerry Bailey.
To him.
Yeah, his legacy. Yeah, absolutely. You talked about when you were writing the book and the reviews that you were reading, Terry, and things like that. I know that you had several armchair authors who wanted to give you advice on what you should have done or how you should have done this, or maybe you should have left this out or added this in. I personally think, my opinion is that what do you say to those folks? Nicely. But I think it's important when you're telling the story to put somebody in 1976. Yeah. It was a different time. Yeah. And a different time for media, different time for, communities and things like that. And nothing like that had happened, really in Sapulpa. So what do you tell people?
The most critical part, the most criticism I've received was that some of the history of Sapulpa football was unnecessary. And I'll be completely honest, it was kind of self-serving. I wanted people to read their name and want to buy the book. So I threw as many names in there. But I also thought it was relevant to a certain extent. And there have been some people that have said, I absolutely loved the statistics, the history of Sapulpa football. But those people, they had a vested interest in the town and the football team and stuff. So as far as you and I know each other really well, and I probably don't handle criticism the best.
What?
I love to argue with people.
Sure.
With this, I've actually been relatively tame. Anytime anyone said I thought there was too many statistics, I was like, I get it. I really do.
Yeah.
When if anyone challenged whether it was true or not, or the facts, I was probably a little bit more harsh because I don't think anybody can argue anything in it because it's all from interviews, court transcripts, that kind of thing. I don't ever go into what was in somebody's state of mind because I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to recreate a conversation that didn't happen. That morning whenever Guy Bailey, running off to class and he saw his dad and Rager talking in the parking lot, that conversation that's in the book was retold by Guy in the court transcripts, during Rager's trial, and whenever I talked to him on the phone, and it didn't change.
Right.
So, that kind of stuff, I probably got a little more sideways with that kind of stuff. But
well, one thing I will say, I do know that, by reading the book and then talking to you off air, I know that you did your homework. I mean, I know that you did your work. I know that you put in the time to interview people, and then the same, just like with the guy, like even the conversation, it doesn't go in depth in the book. I mean, I'll be honest with you. You're not going to open it up and go, oh my gosh. Right. But that's because that was what was told.
Yeah.
And that's part of record, not you guessing what else he might have thought, because that's not fact. At that point, that becomes what you think he said or whatever. So I think it's great that it's in there, and I honestly would stand on anything in this book too. And I love the fact that, I mean, you're in on the story. You know where it's headed, and you know what's going on and what it is. And so for me, it was great because that one chapter would end, and then you go to the next chapter, and it may be something about, a backstory or a piece of that to fill in some of the facts,
right?
To put you in that time era. I know that you talked about Nowata in there as well.
Yeah.
And you kind of have a family tie there with Coach Bailey.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, my family's from Nowata. We moved to Sapulpa when I was in kindergarten. We actually went from Nowata to Sand Springs for a year or two, and then to Sapulpa when I was in kindergarten. But my parents both graduated from Nowata. My grandparents are still in Nowata. And Coach Bailey won a state championship in 1970, and my cousin was the starting quarterback on the team. I still to this day say that season, that story could be a book on its own, and I think it rivals Remember the Titans or whatever football movies out there, just because they flat out weren't supposed to win. They weren't supposed to even make the playoffs.
And the quarterback's name?
D. Page.
There you go.
That's my cousin. So yeah, I had heard stories about Coach Bailey as a coach from him, and then my Aunt Cheryl Page, she babysat I think a few times for the Baileys, and I think they lived close to them. I mean, everybody in Nowata lives close together in the town, but yeah, so I had heard about him as a coach from them, and then that would kind of start the conversation about his death, when I was a kid. That's kind of the tie there. And so Bailey went from Nowata to Sapulpa, and then I think he had 5 years. He was from 71 to 76, and then he resigned. And he was going to go on to coach somewhere else. I've heard a million different places. Me and Terry have had this conversation. And when you talk about the research and everything like that, I really can't express how involved Terry was, because there were some nights I would just get a phone call and he'd say, "Hey, I remembered, whenever we were having practice or blah, blah, blah." And it just would add more to the story. And even if I didn't necessarily use that chunk, it might have led to me finding something else out or asking another question.
So let me ask you that. Were they both your coaches? Did you have them as a coach?
Yeah, I was a sophomore, so obviously I got no playing time.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, everybody in practice. Rager was the offensive line coach. Johnny Richardson was my position coach. But I mean, Rager was just an intimidating guy, especially for a 16-year-old sophomore, that's a tall, skinny kid. And I mean, he would just look at you and you'd be intimidated by him. He was hard on everybody in practice. He got on. I think he got on to everybody but me. I don't think he ever jumped on me, but I saw him jump on players, and I thought, man, that guy's just mean. He's nothing but mean. But the real amazing thing about this whole deal with Kirk doing his research is, I wouldn't know a percentage, but most of the people involved were still around, and he interviewed them. Some passed away after he interviewed them. I think you got to interview Mr. Dodson, Kent Thompson. I mean, a lot of the football coaches. I gave him names of a lot of junior and senior football players from that year to contact.
Well, and the first phone call that I made as an interview was to Steve Shibley Sr., who was my athletic director when I played soccer and football at Sapulpa, but he was the wrestling coach when this happened. Yeah. He's actually the very last person to see them alive or to leaving. He saw them in the cars. They were leaving town. So Terry was probably the last student to see them leave the school, unless someone might have seen them in the parking lot. But, none of those.
As far as even record, too.
As far as record goes, yeah. So when I called him, the first conversation we had was a great conversation, because at first he was kind of quiet a little bit, and then all of this information came flooding out. It seemed to me like it was cathartic for him, because I would probably say that he hadn't talked about it in years.
Oh, I'm serious. A lot of people have suppressed it, and it's,
See, I wondered about that too, with it being compartmentalized and kind of put away on a shelf somewhere. Then was it like the floodgates opened, or was it the Band-Aid being ripped off?
It was like Amy had sliced about 12 onions in the kitchen, and that it brought back a flood of emotions. He did a tremendous job on this.
We're going to take a break, but I wanted to tell you this story real quick. But so right after I read the book, I was taking my daughter Cheyenne to school, and we were at the intersection there by Charles Page High School. I was taking her to the band room that morning, and a car passed us coming through the intersection at the light, and she said, "Oh, hey, that's Coach so-and-so." And my first thought was, oh, what make and model of car was it? And did he have anybody in there with him? Because that might come back later. Right. So, I thought, man, I'm really living this book too much.
Well, the thing about Coach Bailey was he had that blue El Camino. After practice, there would be guys that didn't have rides. And now we're talking 76.
Right.
So, or 75 football season. So you would see 10 or 12 or maybe even 15 guys in the back of that
hanging off the back of that El Camino.
And he was taking people home.
And he wasn't afraid to drive up to the hill.
No.
Which the hill was a predominantly black part of Sapulpa.
I remember our very first meeting before the first practice. What he did that year was have a camp, basically. We would get there at 6 in the morning, and we were there till after the last practice in the evening. So it was like an all-day long thing. We had 3 practices a day.
Wow.
And now they can't do that. Now they can't practice them past an hour.
That's right.
And he told us the very first meeting, I don't care if you're black, white, brown, yellow, blue. Everybody is treated the same, and you all have the same opportunity. He goes, I don't play favorites.
That's awesome.
I've heard that from so many people.
When we come back, we'll talk a little more about that because that kind of sets up part of the book. You are hanging out with Kirk McCracken and Terry Holbrook. We are going to be back in just moments with Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton.
Don't go anywhere. More of the Behind the Mic podcast is next.
I'm Mo.
And I'm Sheila Joe. And we're Mojo Merchandise. Mojo Merchandise was created by 2 friends with a craft passion.
We love to make things as gifts, like baby shower presents, wedding shower presents, party decorations, and balloon bouquets.
There is nothing we can't do once we put our mind to it.
We specialize in vinyl printed t-shirts,
home decor signs, pillowcases, cups, and much more.
If you have a favorite scripture or a mom saying you want on a t-shirt or sign, we've got you covered.
If you have an idea or needing a gift, let Mojo Merchandise make exactly what you need.
You're listening to the Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton podcast.
Hey, thanks, Candace. We are back with Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton. My special guest today is Kirk McCracken, author of the book Because of the Hate. And we're going to talk about that in a second. We're also joined by Terry Holbrook. And I'm hearing for the first time how involved you were in kind of getting some of this story out. And it sounds like that it was pretty important for you, too, to get it out.
Well, it was. And I knew Kirk would do a good job with this, and I knew he was going to be thorough. And so I tried to provide him with everything I knew and could remember, and names of people that I knew that could remember. You know, the one thing he did was track down most of the coaches that were there at the time.
Right.
He went through a lot, and I'm still amazed that he put this all together.
Yeah. Well, you know, we were talking before the break, we were talking about race relations, and we were talking about, there is mentioned in the book quite a bit of story about that. Talk to me a little bit about that, because you were talking about how Coach Bailey made it very clear from the beginning, hey, you know, there's no favorites, and I don't see skin color.
Exactly.
And so everybody's equal on this field, and every one of you are going to have to hustle. You're going to have to, get it on your own. And I think that's cool. We're talking about wasn't afraid to go to the hill, which was predominantly black then. So tell me about that a little bit. How does that play into the story? Because, I mean, even the title itself is kind of from that.
Well, and the title has kind of caused a little bit of controversy with people. I did a book signing in Nowata, and one of the first people that walked through the door was a little old lady. She was like, I don't like the title of this book. And I said, I'm sorry. And she said, yeah, I don't remember there being any hate. I don't remember there. And I said, well, it's actually a quote. I said, it's not something that I came up with. Whenever Rager was asked why he did it, he said, I guess it was because of the hate. And so when I explained that to her, she really didn't want to accept my answer. And there were some other people that said that they really didn't like the title either, because they thought it kind of painted maybe the town in a bad light, that it was he killed him for race reasons, and that wasn't true. I mean, that's not why he did it, and has nothing to do with the title. Race has nothing to do with the title. But if anyone was to pretend there weren't really pretty bad racial tensions in Sapulpa at the time, they're kidding themselves, because at one point there was a race riot, for lack of a better term, at the high school, and the National Guard had to be called in. So there were some race things. As a matter of fact, the guy who runs his name escapes me, but the guy who runs the museum and the historical society, at Sapulpa, he wasn't upset with me, but we had an interesting conversation, because he thought that I alluded that Sapulpa was still segregated. And I was like, well, they are to a certain extent. Anybody can live anywhere they want in Sapulpa. There are black people that live down in town, and then there are white people that live up on the hill. But if you look at the demographics, there are still the hill is still predominantly black. It's not segregated in the sense that they're forced to live up there,
Right.
but it is in the sense that that's kind of the way it's always been, and that was what I was trying to paint in the book. There was a time where they had to live on the hill; they couldn't live in town,
Right.
And now that that's different, it's still kind of the same. The more things change, the more they stay the same, kind of a deal. He thought I was saying that it's still forced, and I don't believe that I was saying that at all. But I was trying to paint a picture that at the time there were some tensions, and Terry lived through it. He could probably say more about it than I could.
Let me think. What year? There was a riot at the school in the early 70s. So we're just talking maybe 3 or 4 years before this happened. And I never saw from any of the guys on the team any kind of racial problem. I mean, it was a pretty good tight-knit group, and with some exceptional athletes. Victor Mackey, Theodore Pearson. Those guys were seniors that year, 75. The 75 season. Ronald Mackey, Ronald Pearson. I mean, and we all got along, and everybody, there was never a problem.
Kirk, you said you were talking about that Bailey was kind of a pioneer with race relations, or was trying to, do that. We haven't ever talked about it, but those that don't know, Paul Rager was black.
Yeah.
And so he was part of the staff. And then you were talking about it as well. It sounds like, maybe one of the reasons why there wasn't a lot of race relations problems on the team was because Coach Bailey immediately said, hey, we're all equal here.
Exactly.
I mean, put it right there. It said, hey, we're working along, excite each other. We're gonna work you, but you gotta earn it. And it doesn't depend on, the color of your skin. So
exactly.
He was a pioneer that way.
Well, and from what I've been told, and Terry's told me this as well as other coaches and players, he said everyone's equal, but it was more about the way he treated everyone.
Yeah.
He didn't stand up on a soapbox and say, I'm a social justice warrior, I'm going to bring about change. He told the players, hey, if the good players are going to play, no matter what the color of their skin, and we're all going to treat each other good. We're going to treat each other great. We're going to be a family. But he didn't, look for the newspapers or the spotlight and say, I'm going to bring about change in Sapulpa. It was through his actions more than anything. And the way he treated people, and the way that people saw him taking the black players home, in the back of his El Camino, or some of the players were piled in the front with him and some were in the back. And so to me, that speaks volumes, because it was more about what he did,
the example
than what he said.
Instead of trying to be some, he wasn't banging a gong or whatever. He was for the attention. He was actually living it out.
And Coach Ray Ryan's the head basketball coach. He's probably one of the funniest guys you'll ever talk to, and he's not trying to be funny. I mean, he's just a goofy guy. Great basketball coach. But he was telling me a story one time that involved race, and he told me that some black kids in the parking lot squared off with some white kids in the parking lot. They were not going to back down. Neither side was going to back down.
Right.
And a teacher ran into the teacher's lounge and was like, there's, going to be a fight out in the parking lot, and, you need to get out there and help. And Coach Ryan was like, why are you asking me? And she's like, you need to get out there and help. And he looked at the female teachers and he was like, you guys want equal rights. Why don't you guys get out there? And he said it tongue in cheek. But I mean, I think he actually probably said it out loud.
Now that you brought up Coach Ryan's, I have one little quick story with him. Back when he had the great team, 73, 74, 75. I forget who they're playing, but he is on the referee hard. And, I mean, he's giving this guy grief every time he comes down the floor. And the guy told him, he said, you set your butt in that chair and don't leave it. Next thing you know, Coach Ryan's he's standing up, holding the chair to his butt, trying to move down the sideline.
That probably paints the best picture of him.
Right, that's pretty funny.
But I had the chance to talk to him about race because he was a coach as well, and he had a lot of black players on his team, and he said the same thing about Coach Bailey. And Coach Ryan's was the same way. I mean, he had to get everyone on his team to buy into what he was trying to do, black, white, brown, green, whatever. I think the coaching staff, or the coaches, I think they did a pretty good job of that back then.
They did. I don't recall. I mean, those guys were just brothers to me. I mean, you're out there for the same cause. Ricky Bruner, who's I don't know if he's still doing the rec
I think
center.
he still is, yeah.
Is he? Ricky was one tremendous athlete, big, fast. Ricky was like a brother to me. He played baseball with us growing up, and my dad just loved Ricky Bruner, Ronald Shaw, all those guys.
Yeah.
They're...
And now Ricky Jr.'s the head basketball coach for the boys team.
Let's get back to the book real quick on a couple of points.
Sure.
Like I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I want people to buy the book. It's a good book. I mean, you can get it through a digital download, a hard copy of it, a paperback copy, or now the audiobook if you love to listen to stuff, while you're in the car or whatever, if you're not listening to my podcast.
Sure.
And one of the things that bugged me about the story is how that he was convicted.
Right.
Rager was convicted
Yes.
of this, but he never served one bit of time for it.
No.
The entire time he was alive.
Yeah. If you're wanting closure, you're not going to get it in this book.
That part of it, right.
and
that's ultimately why I brought it up, is
Right.
because, I was like, yeah, let's get him. Yeah, okay, that's great. He needs to serve time. He admitted to it. Well, the problem is that he was convicted. I mean, there was overwhelming evidence that, obviously he did it, but he never served one bit of time for it.
Right.
I saw him between, it was sometime after the trial and before he passed away. I couldn't tell you when in there, but going through Old Mulgee, and he's sitting on the front porch of the house, just sitting out there.
Yeah.
And that story, it has been repeated to me so many times by so many different people. It's either that he was sitting on his mom's front porch because, from what I understand, his wife divorced him and moved the family away, and he moved back with his mom in Old Mulgee. It's either that or he was just seen walking around town.
Yeah.
Free.
I mean,
after he had been convicted.
To me, that is amazing.
Well, and that's the part about the book that I really tried to make people understand, is that even the justice system was different back then. There were certain things that you could do back then that you can't do now. Like there was an appellate bond where even if you were convicted of murder, you could file, you could pay a bond and you could be out while your
trial's
conviction, while your conviction was being appealed.
Yeah.
Not only that, I mean, if you think that the mental health system is bad now, it was even worse back then.
Right.
To where you could fake like you were mentally ill, and they would send you to a mental institution for a while, and then when you started to kind of come around, they'd send you back and say, okay, you've got to start serving your time, so then you just had to start acting crazy again.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's what worked for him.
And so I wanted to make that clear because whenever people who hadn't quite finished the book or knew the story but hadn't started it yet, they were like, yeah, he didn't serve a day in jail. Why is that? So I wanted to really make it clear why that happened. And back in 1976, if you killed somebody, no matter how well you planned it for a year and you were meticulous and you followed this person around, you couldn't get more than second-degree murder.
Right.
Because first-degree murder was reserved for political figures or police officers or emergency personnel, that kind of thing. So he wasn't going to get first-degree murder no matter what. Yeah, I mean, some people were like, how did he not get the death penalty, Yeah. It was like,
again, perfect opportunity and perfect example for the setup of the book, too, is because to put you back in 1976, because we have a tendency to be stuck in whatever year we're in now.
Sure.
And that just didn't happen that way. It was changed eventually, but even in the justice system, that's how it worked.
Well, even the fashion,
it's crazy.
The fashion of the time,
sure,
or what buildings might have been in Sapulpa or businesses that aren't there now.
Yeah,
I called Terry and he was like, man, was there a slaughterhouse or not a slaughterhouse?
The Wickham's Packing.
Yeah, Wickham's Packing, brick, and there were like 3 glass plants.
Yeah.
Now there's 1. I mean, he was telling me, this was here, this was there, this was a big part of, a lot of people worked here, that kind of thing. And I wanted to paint that picture because I'm addicted to like B horror movies. Like the worse acting, the better for me.
Sure.
But when I watch it and I was like, and it's like, okay, in 1972, blah, blah, blah. And you click play and start to watch it, the people have today's haircuts and they're wearing today's. It makes me so mad because it's like they didn't even try.
Yeah.
I want it to look like 1972, and so I wanted to do that for this and really paint that picture of the bell bottoms and the butterfly collars and
the plaid pants and the stripes and absolutely.
The outfit that Bailey was wearing whenever he left and what he was found dead end, it was plaid pants, a purple leather jacket, and a butterfly collar thing. And, that was just the style back then.
Right.
So I wanted to paint that picture.
And I think you did a great job in the book for that. To me, that's part of what makes the story so enthralling and a page-turner, is because I was taken back to that time period. Reading each piece, the backstory on how that is, and I know that you had cooperation by the Bailey family and several people with Terry. And I'm glad you were here today to hear your thoughts on that time period. But more importantly, like I said, I think it sounds like, it was a good thing that this book was written, because it helped you kind of get things out.
I think that's true for a lot of people that read that lived through it.
I mean, I've seen some reviews myself as well, and I've seen a lot, hey, I went to school with Bailey's son, or I was there that day, and I remember that, and how scared we were after we figured out that, oh my gosh, they're missing. But then when word got out that Bailey had been found, and then word got out, oh my gosh, Rager was found alive, but this is what they think. You could see that creeping in, that fear turned to, the questions to fear, to, finally hearing some of the truth. So when you were going through the book, after the book came out, we were talking about the family, and you had talked with Guy a little bit, but you had some contact, was it with his wife?
Yeah. When I talked to Guy, it was back during the information gathering stage. And again, he gave me just some great stuff about his dad, about that morning, about just the time. And I felt like it was really cathartic for him as well to kind of get that out from what he knew. So then I just lost touch. I mean, there was really no reason for me to contact him. I had put the book away. So whenever I started back up again, I talked mainly with one of Jerry's sisters. She was very supportive and everything, and she wanted me to make sure that Guy, got a copy. Well, before I even had a chance to send it to him, Guy's wife reached out to me on social media and said, hey, will you send 2 copies? And I said, sure. And she's like, I want one for Guy, and then I'd like you to make another one out to Jerry Bailey. And immediately it kind of freaked me out. And I thought, that's so weird. And then I realized that Guy's oldest son is named Jerry. And so it was really an honor to sit down and write to him and say, I wish I could have met your grandfather. And, this book is to honor his memory and everything. Yeah, talking with her was great. And then they got their copies, and then she sent me another message back. And I asked how he liked it, and she said he really liked it, and it answered so many questions for him, because he didn't know a lot of what was in there because they just didn't talk about it.
Yeah, you were talking to me about it. In that, you said that, there was a couple of parts in the book that were pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And you were like, oh, yeah. And you were thinking, when you talked about the autopsy, or when you talked about those things, and you were like, yeah, I tried to not put a lot of detail in the book like that, but it was funny because that was her answer. It was like, no, actually, that wasn't what it was. It was the fact that, I didn't have those answers. As Guy said, I didn't have those answers whenever.
Well, I'm sure that they tried to shield Guy and Deidre.
That's exactly
insulate
right.
them,
from everything that was going on the best they could back then.
Yeah, and, a lot of people have asked me that I don't even know how Guy and Beverly and Deidre are doing, and a lot of them didn't know that Beverly had passed. This is, I don't even know if this is necessary, but so many guys that went to school back then with Guy and Deidre, one of their main questions was, is Deidre still as beautiful as she was back in high school? Because she is gorgeous, like her mom. Beverly was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I haven't had the chance to meet Deidre in person, but I'm sure she absolutely is. But a lot of people ask how Guy was doing, and they would say, I walked him down to the hall, or I was an office aide, and I had to walk him down to the office, after they found out.
That day,
Some people, I believe, some people, it didn't, like the timeline didn't match up. They kind of had put themselves in it, but they obviously were friends, and they really truly cared about, how Guy and Deidre were doing, and that to me also shows how much the family meant to the town.
Well,
People wanted to know how they were doing.
And that probably ought to, that would probably ought to make you feel pretty good, too, about the book. Just the fact that, number one, you got the facts right, but on top of that, how much therapy, maybe, I don't know if that's quite the word, but kind of therapy that came from the book from people who didn't know. Number one, setting the record straight. Here's the facts. This is what actually happened. It wasn't a screwdriver. It wasn't in the parking lot of the high school. These are the things, the timeline behind it and stuff like that. So talking to Terry, I think it was lethargic for everybody to kind of get all that out and to just work through that, once and for all. So.
Sure. I think so. When Terry was finished with it, it was less than 24 hours that I had published it. And he called me and just said, basically you nailed it. And that meant a lot to me because the information that he gave me and that other people gave me, I wanted to be able to tell their story as well because they were a part of this. And so to be tasked with that is kind of stressful thinking about it. But like I said, not many people have really challenged me on whether it's truthful or whatever.
Well, and I think too, I read a couple of different comments as well. I get in trouble by reading comments too much, because it makes me want to fight too. But, one of the comments I heard was something about how tacky it was that you were talking about this murder after it had been put away and everything else. But you know what? The way I look at that is, especially after reading the book 3 times now, I didn't find anything in there that was gratuitous. We've talked about it before, how that in research that you went to the archives, you were doing the research and you were collecting pictures and things that were part of the transcripts, and the court and trial, all those records, the trial. And the funny thing was, I remember you telling me, he said, I was, working through a lot of these, the pictures are there, the autopsy photos are there, things are part of the record. And you said I was making copies of some of this stuff so I wouldn't forget it and I would be able to recall it easier. And then they came in with a box full of stuff and said, well, actually, these are all copies of this stuff. Here, take these. And so for me, the thing I thought was interesting was the fact that you had those pictures, you had that information and those things that you could have, but you didn't. And I think to me that shows restraint and respect, and also in wanting to get the story correct because of that.
How can anybody argue when he's got court transcripts, he's got the autopsy, he's got pictures, and he's got he's talked to people that were there,
directly involved, And
that's the thing, I love true crime. We've talked about that. Sure. And most of the time when you open up a true crime book, there are a lot of times there's a picture of the crime scene, or part of, the feet or something like that. I just thought it was so unnecessary because since it has been put away for so long, that to me is the last thing I want people to see when they pick the, I don't want them to see it at all.
Well, the book paints the picture.
It does, right.
So
you're right.
You didn't
You're
need
absolutely
all
right.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
And a funny story about when we went to the archives, Greg Stone, who's actually the provost of TCC, the Metro campus, at the time he was the assistant editor of the Sapulpa Herald, where I was working, and we took a day off and we went down to the archives. Well, we snuck his laptop and his scanner in because it's like $1 a page if they print it off for you. So
I'm gonna get a bill now.
So I was the lookout, and he's scanning as many trial, transcripts. He did the pictures first, everything like that. We're a couple hours into it, and the lady comes over with a box, and she's like, "I found this. We made duplicates of everything for some reason. You can just have it." And he's trying to cover.
Yeah, well, that's nice.
He's trying to cover his laptop like nothing's going on, And we literally could have picked the box up and left, you know. But they probably saw us doing that and thought, we'll give him a couple hours and then we'll give him the box.
Yeah, we'll let this deception go on for a little while.
Exactly.
They're really putting some effort into it over there
how
at
far
that table.
they take this.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what's next for you?
Man, I don't know, but I've had so many people ask me what is next. And it's weird, but it's awesome at the same time when someone says, "I love your writing style. What's your next book about?" It's like, oh man, I didn't think that far ahead. Like, I'm an author now.
Right.
You know what I mean? I still have my real job, but like people have asked me, I want to read your next book. What's it about?
Me too.
And I haven't gotten that far, even though they've asked me this in the past year, or since January. Right. So I don't know. I'd like to keep it local. And I'd like for it to be true crime and have a history behind it. I know that there have been some murders that have happened in Sand Springs that some are solved, some are unsolved. I know the Dina Dean case has been really popular lately.
Yeah. And as of late, right? I started saying
they thought they had
reopened that.
Yeah, they just reopened it. And I don't know if anybody's working on one of those, but I need to start asking around. And,
Right.
From where I'm from in Creek County, I mean, Terry can tell you, you want to talk about crime. There's a reason that it's nicknamed Crook County, but I mean, there have been some serious stuff. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Terry, but my dad was telling me that he swears up and down that there was a lady who I think owned a brothel.
Cleo Epps.
Yes.
What you're looking for.
And my dad said, you've got to, if you want to do one, you need to, because there was a bombing.
Oh,
is that right?
There was all kinds of stuff tied into her and people after her. And
so did we just
working
figure
with
out what
her.
my next book's going to be?
I think so.
And you're going to help me?
You know what's really weird?
I think we just figured it out.
Right.
Back when I was selling real estate, I sold that property. I had to go to Wagner. I had to run down her brother, who was elderly and ill, to sign a quitclaim deed to get this property sold. And it was Cleo Epps' brother.
Now, I'll give you a quick. Now, this is just me. I have not researched this at all,
Right.
but this is just what I've heard. This is going to go into.
You are getting scoop right now.
This is going to get into the rumor part
Right.
of like what we've had to deal with my book. But my dad told me. So if this is wrong, then it's my dad's fault.
Okay.
But my dad told me that she was involved in some bad stuff, and there was a police officer that was on her payroll, basically, or that she was having a relationship with. But her boyfriend found out and then killed the police officer.
That I don't know.
Something to that effect.
I know she was a bootlegger, so there was
Okay.
That tells you, the kind of people she was dealing
Right.
with.
So there was all kinds of stuff here and there, and so
The bloody brothel. I can hear it.
Well,
now.
I don't know if it was I heard she was maybe into that, but I don't know.
It was out there off of West 81st Street or something out there. It's where this land was. It's out north of Sapulpa,
Okay.
off of New Sapulpa Road.
Okay.
And a lot of the Creek County Mafia,
Yes.
so to speak,
That's what we
used
call
to
it.
hang out. What was the steakhouse over there that was
Avalon?
Avalon. Yeah.
Wow.
The old Avalon, not where they built the
the
new
old
one.
Avalon, it was kind of back. It wasn't right off the road.
Right.
And when you walked in, it was like it felt like a mafia kind of
See,
place.
I've always felt that same way about the Celebrity Club at 31st and Yale. You walk in and it's all red velvet and there's booths in the corner. And you expected either Don Rickles to come out and roast you, or Frank Sinatra to come out and sing a tune or something, and then people show up with Tommy guns. Because, I mean, it feels that way to me, too.
Sure.
Now, I'm not saying that it is. I'm
but
just
that's
saying
the
it's what it
stuff
feels like.
that I love
Yep.
because we're so removed from it.
Right.
That it's stuff that I want to sink my teeth into because it's
I
just,
think I hear and see
Maybe.
another book forming.
Maybe.
Who knows? Another partnership here.
Yeah,
I see.
it's fine with me.
I have to ask, is this going anywhere, the book now?
Yeah, I've sold quite a few.
I'm not talking about sales.
Oh, you're talking about like a movie?
Yeah.
I did have something in the works. It fell through. Felt like I really wanted to step back because it was moving so fast, and the guy was wanting to move forward a lot faster.
I started to say that now before somebody says, well, now wait, I figured you would want it to be a movie.
Oh, I do.
You do, but I want to clarify real quick. It was kind of pressure from this person.
Yeah.
And you were like, whoa, hang on a second. Why do you need to know that fast? And why do you need to, because a lot of that works like that. They'll come in, they'll buy a bunch of transcripts or whatever. You don't have any control over it after that point. So
that was the problem, was control.
Yeah, I mean,
it was like, we've got a short window to do this. Don't worry about what the paperwork says.
Yeah, see, and I would,
Sign right here.
and I would be the same way. I mean, that's one thing that you did say.
It was a blank piece of paper with a line at the bottom.
There's no writing on there. Well, there
We'll
will
fill
be.
it in.
Yeah, there will be.
We'll
Right.
fill it
Yeah.
in.
So
We'll
no,
dot the I's
I think that's a great move on your part.
Yeah,
because
I think it could have been done, but I think I would have given up a whole lot.
Yeah.
And then when it was all said and done, been like, if it was successful, I don't think I would have seen monetarily.
quite the monetary.
So
That you. But
I've had a few other people say that they know people, and so it's kind of dead right now as far as that goes. But I'd love to see it.
But if it's meant to be, it's going to be meant to be. And I think
I think
it was a wise choice on your part, honestly, for that. Just wait on that. But I think
I really
it would make a
shouldn't-
great film. It
I think
would make
so.
a great film, but I think you're right.
I probably shouldn't have thrown it out there on social media that I was talking to a screenwriter in Hollywood because, that stuff.
Right.
I mean, there have been movies written and bought and all that kind of stuff that sat on a shelf for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then was eventually made or not or
Yeah.
scrapped. So I kind of jumped the gun on that. But it was something in the works. But
I hate for it to be shelved and then not be,
Sure.
something that somebody can have access to start looking at for film. So that's great. So I know that you have the book out, and it is available for purchase for digital readers and things like that, also for paperback, which I've got my copy sitting right next to me right now. And you also, recently, it became an audiobook.
Yeah, Tantor Media reached out to me and said, we saw how this was doing through Amazon, and we want to buy the rights to the audiobook. And so we worked out some numbers, and took them about 2 months. They had to hire the actor, and he read it, and they sent me a couple of emails. How do you pronounce Rager? How do you say this or whatever? And once they got all that down, it was released probably 2-3 weeks ago, and I really haven't checked on it to see how. I mean, they told me that it's going to do really well at first, and then we'll, track it and all that.
He just waits for that check.
Yeah, that's right. That's I just sit back,
waiting for the check,
lighting my cigars,
rain money, right?
$100 bills.
Right. Well, I wouldn't be lying if I didn't say that I was a little sad that I wasn't reading your book, but that's okay.
I wish they didn't even give me a choice.
Yeah.
That happened fast too. And, I've never done this before. And I don't have an entertainment lawyer, or anything like that. So kind of would ask my parents, like, does this sound like a good deal to you?
Yeah. What do you think of this? Yeah.
Not that I've ever taken their advice, but it's been wild.
I will say, actually, if you love to read, but you just don't have the time, maybe you're in the car driving a lot during the day or whatever, it would be worth it to go out and get the audio version so that you can listen to it as you go. I think you will find it a good book. I'm telling you, this is a good story. I mean, it is a very good story about a tragic thing that happened, and I learned a lot about it. I had passed the Bailey Building several times. I lived in Sapulpa for quite a while. Never knew why it was named the Bailey Building. I just knew that it was the Bailey Building. So it filled in a lot of things. But if you are a true crime fan, you'll love this book.
I appreciate it.
And I have a little question here. It was brought to your attention. So here it is. Kirk, I know that you don't have an answer for this, but as a former teacher, I just don't understand why Jerry left school with Paul that day. Jerry had a first hour class. I just cannot understand what could have been so important that he would have cut his first hour without telling someone. What's your answer to that?
The answer is there is no answer. I don't know. But if I was to speculate, it would be that he thought he was helping Rager in some way, that he either needed counsel or he needed something. But I think that's the answer we will never get, because there's only 2 people that know it, and they're both dead.
So let me ask you this, a final question on that, and I want your answer as well, because really yours more than his, because of the fact that you saw them that morning. Do you think that he lured him out there to kill him, or do you think that it happened, do you think it happened like at a spur of the moment, or
I think he lured him out there, and the reason being he had a knife. That knife was, I don't know whether it was on him or in the car, but he had a knife.
So premeditated.
I think so too. It was one of his kitchen knives. So he would have had to have put it in his car for some reason. It was under his seat. So whenever he stopped and said, hey, I want to show you something in the trunk, and he gave the keys to Bailey, he did that to get him out so he could then pull the knife out. Because if he does that while they're both sitting in the car, Jerry might have more of a chance to defend himself.
Yeah, because the thing was, like you had alluded to, he was a big guy. Paul was a big guy, and Rager was a big guy, and so he could have easily overpowered him whenever they were outside the vehicle.
And it wasn't fat. He was muscle.
Right, yeah. I mean, he was a solid guy. So therefore, that's the other thing, and Bailey was smaller than him, although muscular, and, was athletic as well. We can coach. And you think the same? You think that he, premeditated?
Yeah. Absolutely.
In a fist fight without weapons, Coach Bailey would have had a chance.
Yeah,
but he got stabbed right away. Had to.
Matter of fact, Bailey had a cut on his eye that the medical examiner either thinks was from the knife, just the crazy, or that he was punched and kind of dazed and then stabbed. So I think he absolutely had every intent.
Wow.
Because, just like you said, because of the hate, and he let that fester. For some reason, he thought the only way to remedy that was to kill him. And it was all based on false information.
Yeah, stuff that he was given, information that he was given, that was false.
Yeah, another criticism really quick that I got from several different people was that they wanted me to lay the blame at the feet of someone who's now passed. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that because I didn't have absolute proof.
Right.
I think they might be right, but that doesn't mean I can print it.
Well, and besides that, even if it was right, he still chose to do it.
Right.
So I mean,
yeah,
you lay it where it belongs. Rigor. I mean,
people screw you over all the time.
Right.
You move on, and
you may remember it.
Right.
And okay, I won't make that mistake again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you don't kill somebody over it.
No.
So that's still, to me, that would be still laying it at his feet, not anybody else's. So,
well, and as far as like his mental health, a lot of people don't even know, and I think Terry learned this for the first time, was that 2 weeks before he actually murdered Bailey, he had tried to kill himself and
right.
was put, for the first time that we know of, admitted into at least the mental part of Hillcrest.
Because that's mentioned in the book
Right.
about the fact that he had missed some school days.
Yeah.
And the thing, I think that when you were talking about why did he cut class, because he genuinely cared for people, and he figured, Paul needs to talk, and we need to work through something here. Let's go somewhere, and I'll help you with that.
Because I think if they come back to school, then I think Jerry could easily go to the administration and say, hey, I think this guy was having trouble. He was unbalanced, and he needed to talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. And he either would have gotten in trouble, or they would have said, hey, thanks for trying to help. But I think he was trying to help in some way.
Mm. I didn't want to give away a ton about the book because, like I said, I want people to read this book. It is so fantastic, and I totally agree with you, Terry. I think it's a great book, but on top of that, I think it helped a lot of people to be able to, number one, get the facts on the case. People that I know that have grown up in Sapulpa as well have said the same thing. They'd be, oh my gosh, I've read this book, and I can't believe that. I thought all these things all these years, thought he was found, and I thought it was a disgruntled parent, or I thought it was a screwdriver, or I thought it was something else, and to get that information out, it was good. For the third time when I read the book, I was still just as much turning the page, trying to finish up the book. So it's a good one. Like I said, if you don't have time to read it all, then go out and download the audio version of it. I guarantee you won't regret it. It's a good one. Thank you guys both for being here.
Thank you very
Kurt,
much.
thank you for being here. Terry, thank you for letting me meet you, and then
You're
also
welcome.
for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Now me and Terry have some work to do. We got another book to write.
I'm telling you, I think so. And then you can be back here
That's
again,
right, exactly.
and we'll talk about the new book.
You got it.
The Bloody Brothel, or the brothel who
the
speaks, or
bootlegging.
the bootleg brothel, or something. I see it already in my head. All right, great. Well, man, thank you both for being here today.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
This episode of the Behind the Mic podcast was brought to you by Mojo Merchandise. Never miss a show by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and Google Play. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go to our Facebook page and leave a comment, invite a friend, and share our podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening to Behind the Mic with Ric Hampton.